Hello everyone, my name is Christina Cass. If you saw the last video, then you know that. The only difference is I just graduated in May, so now I am an alumni of Delaware Law. And me and Professor Morale just thought that this would also be a very helpful video. So, without further ado, here we go. Okay, so the first thing really that we're going to go over is terminology. Um, In the military, this is going to sound crazy, but the medics, which are just enlisted service members, they're known as medics, but they're also kind of like the doctors. They can be seen equivalent to civilian EMTs, or medics are closer to paramedics, and that's typically who you see. Each unit has a medic or like a group of medics, a few like attached to them. Um, Next is sick call. Sick call is just you go into a designated location. Unfortunately, one thing that I'll speak about and to keep in mind is when you go to sick call, it's usually during PT hours. So usually sick call hours are like from 4 to like 9 or 6 to 9, something like that. PT hours. So keep that in mind, what it looks like when you're constantly going to sick call, and really like you can't just like call and make an appointment if you're sick and like expect to get in like, hey, I think I have the flu. No, you have to go to sick call to be seen. um Next is going to be shamming, and this is what they call people that go to sick call in order to avoid duty. PT is considered duty, so keep that in mind. And then malingering, which is an actual criminal offense, and it's defined by UCMJ Article 83, which states that any person subject to this chapter who, with the intent to avoid work, duty, or services, for his illnesses, physical disablement, mental lapse, or mental derangement, or intentionally inflicts illness, physical, I'm sorry, intentionally inflicts self-injury shall be punished by court martial. And for those who don't know what court martial is, it's how you get out the military. However, when you get court martialed, you don't get an honorable discharge, which is kind of, it's good and bad. It's good if you actually do an offense, but malingering is extremely subjective. So really, you can be punished by your commander that just thinks you're skipping PT too much to go to sick call, or that you have too many mental health appointments, or a commander who's not a doctor gets to make that decision, and essentially that will affect the rest of your life, because your discharge follows you, and without a good discharge you'll learn you can't get VA disability, you can't get a lot of your stuff, you can't get the GI Bill, and I could go on for days on the things you can't get. Next is the provider. There's usually one provider for either like a battalion, or which is just like the biggest, one of the biggest groups, or like, as you said, a battalion is about 1,000 soldiers. You get one or two providers, but they may have 12 medics. So that's where it comes into not seeking medical attention, because you have the medics that they can give you some ibuprofen or Tylenol. Um, and then you have the surgeon, which is also assigned at the command level. So battalion, brigade, all of that. So here are some common insults that are faced by military members who go to sick call. So typically, this is usually like new or junior enlisted that have these problems. Officers and senior enlisted, as you know, like they have a lot of senior enlisted, like NCOs, non-commissioned officers. They are the sergeants and they've been through this. So they started as new or junior enlisted. Um, but they'll call you like sick call ranger. But the biggest one that I think stands out to me and that always did, and it's just a toxic culture cycle, is if you don't stop malingering, I will be forced to report you for UCMJ. That is a threat. Like there is no other ways about it. That is a threat, and you are threatening them. So then you make soldiers feel bad about going to sick call. For example, when I first got to a unit, so my unit there were three like platoons, which each have officers over them, and then that's in a company. So one of the soldiers in another platoon that was still in my company ended up dying. He found out he had cancers, and 3 days later he died, which could have been completely preventable, except he wouldn't go to sick call or get seen or make doctor's appointments because of these threats that are so often made. So this is an example of what a sick call slip looks like. You'll most likely see these more likely than not. They're still using them. So this will also have a lot of information on it, especially when you go to linking something to be service connected. Um, if it's in a sick call slip, how are you going to tell me it's not service connected? But to each their own, every situation is different. Next is the just everything summed up. So broadly speaking, medical treatment is highly discouraged within the military. Cultural discouragement of shaming or malingering to avoid duty, which we spoke about. So yeah. And then common sick call experiences between military members doesn't matter really what branch you're in. We all joke about it and we all laugh about it, and we it kind of bonds us. You could think of it like a trauma bond, kind of like you're going through in law school with your friends. Um and I can say that now that I graduated. But so pretty much sick call is frequently called light duty. Um So you're minimizing the aggressive physical activity. So, say you have a 2 mile or really it's like a 12-mile hike or 6 miles. We really only do two for like the PT test, at least in the Army. Um, but they also just give you some, like I said, ibuprofen, and tell you to just keep it pushing. As you can see, like medical advice for lower legs injuries are usually just change your socks and here's here's some ibuprofen. So that we always joke as veterans, like that changes everything, changing your socks. Um, and then next is when you're injured, you get something called a permanent injury. So there's levels to the injuries. There's temporary, which is like, for maybe 90 days. And then there's a permanent injury saying that like you are permanently disabled essentially. And that's usually step one before you get med boarded, which is medically discharged. But also some um branches and some MOSs, they don't like you it's if you don't need to run all the time, they're not going to. Like if you just do like we'll say 42, which is like HR. If you're just doing HR, then obviously you don't need to like yeah, you're not mission ready, but you can stay behind. You can stay in the rear. Whereas like MP and infantrymen, you have to run, you have to be ready to deploy. Um so that. Next is go we're going to talk about is the mental health in the military. I think the military is very much how the stigma used to be for mental health. And now as a society, um, we're learning more about it as more research comes out. However, the military, they're not going to change. They probably will never change. I hope they do one day because a lot of things you go through in the military, you do and see, you're expect to just keep moving like nothing happened. You saw nothing. And as you know, like that's hard. That's you can't just walk away. And you're taught to really suppress those feelings. And that's not healthy. So there's really an unspoken cultural stigma, that seeking mental health resources is weak. You're weak. You shouldn't even be in the military. And also, not only that is, yeah, that's pretty bad, but it also can make them take your weapons away. Now, what are you? in the military without a weapon. Um, Really nothing. You can't do anything. You have no weapon. Like you I feel like that's enough said. Are you gonna sc just scare the bad guy and say boo? So yeah, but they do the mental health resources as I have here is often called behavioral health. So you'll see a lot of files and everything. Everything's going to be called behavioral health. That's what it's called. Even if you're just seeking it for maybe just to talk to somebody, everything's behavioral health. And then, so as mentioned before, here is the med board, which is just a medical discharge. For mental health reasons, a medical discharge is either a 513 or a 517. Also, you can do chapter 9 or 12. Um, they're obviously a little bit different for like Navy, Marines. Every branch is like branch specific with their chapters and what they have. Sorry, my my little dog, she wants to join us. Um, so yeah, but also something to keep in mind is that met these chapters, these med boards, these are going to be on your DD 214. So this will follow you for life. So for something like a personality disorder, like they have something called like failure to adapt. That's just pretty much saying like you failed to like adapt to the really the military, the hazing of the military, the good and the bad of the military. You're maybe just being away from home. But that follows you. Your next boss, when they ask for your DD 214, like that's your life. So I think a lot of people are afraid of that, especially veterans. Veterans and their gun rights are not to be controversial or anything, but they're very big. And they believe that if they tell somebody that they're struggling, then they're going to take away their guns. And I always say that's not the case. People rather you get help because the problem is you not getting help and then owning those guns. So I always try and, be sensitive to that, especially because a veteran myself and, also a gun owner, like I understand how much it is, especially when you get out the military, you almost have a sense of like an identity crisis. Like you don't really know who or what you are anymore. And you're really learning how to come back into the civilian world. So here are the stuff for the Air Force. Too, this is what their chapters are. Um, so as I mentioned a few times, honorable versus general. And other discharges can depend on your diagnosis, your behavior, and your circumstances. Mental health discharges are not automatic. And also, a caveat to that is a lot of officers can't get out on mental health discharges, which is so weird because just because you're an officer doesn't mean you're not struggling or you don't have mental health problems. Um, so yeah. And as I stated it previously, that mental health discharges can follow a veteran for life. So an accurate diagnosis and discharge characterizations are critical. And you'll find that a lot of them was either like a bad command or maybe somebody died in their family and they really just asked for leave. Okay, so this is a huge one, alcohol and drugs in the military. Um, it's a huge problem because you don't have the access to mental health resources or you have that fear. A lot of people self-medicate. Or it just becomes like a thing, like you go out to drink with your battles, you call them, or your friends. It just drinking is part of the culture. For example, I had a lot of DUIs when I was not me personally. Oh my God, I should not me personally, but my soldiers, I had a lot of soldiers that had DUIs. And one of them, he was self-medicating with alcohol, and it was very clear signs like he would show up to PT drunk. And it's so sad because he got a dishonorable discharge, which had to be upgraded because he got out for a DUI. And military, especially as an MP, they don't play with when it comes to drinking and driving. Um, so he eventually got it upgraded, and there is a claim in the VA that is for alcohol or substance abuse. And I feel like if that's a claimable thing, you kind of know where I'm going with this, that it's pretty popular, as sad as it is. So, what's a profile? I was explaining this a bit earlier. So, there's two main types. There's your temporary and your permanent. Um, Permanent, if depending on the type of permanent it is and what you can and cannot do, the limitations of your profile could trigger you to be up for a medical evaluation board. And once this is affected, like you don't have a say, like unless you're going to tell them that you're perfectly fine, but then malingering comes in. So, some people don't want to get out, but maybe they have bad back or bad knees and it was all caused because of the military. And they're not given the option to change MOSs. And then, so here are just some cultural factors. Obviously, the military is very much so on the tough it out mindset. They discourage seeking care. You have a fear of being labeled in a shammer or malinger, and then there's always peer pressure to avoid letting your team down. Because realistically, if wherever you're slacking or your duty, your portion that you're designated to do is slacking, somebody else has to pick up that slack. And that's your family. You don't want them to have to do that. And especially because people get mad about having to pick up more slack than they already have. Everybody's human. That's a normal thing. And that is all I have for you guys today. If you have any questions, you guys can find me on LinkedIn. Professor Morale has my information. Um, I truly appreciate everybody in the Veterans Law Clinic and that you're willing to, even if you're not a veteran, that you're willing to help such a delicate group of people. If I could give you any advice as a freshly graduated um, student that did a lot 4.5 semesters in the VA clinic. As soon as I was eligible, I was like, and I'm still doing it after because I loved it so much, but like learn everything. The Veterans Affairs is you don't have to follow the rules of evidence. So you can learn how to write, you can learn how to express your opinion. And the professors actually, the attorneys that are there, they work with you one-on-one. They care just as much. And like everything, you'll get what you put into it. It's all about what you make it. This clinic has made me a better writer. I came in wanting to be a prosecutor, and now I could not even, no, never. But I do now work with veterans. I love working with veterans. I'll be doing a clerkship. And then I plan on obviously going into criminal defense, especially because you'll find out that, as I mentioned before, with alcohol abuse, criminals criminal offenses and veterans essentially go hand in hand because of the untreated traumas or the it's hard to cope. So yeah, I hope you guys have a good time and you enjoy the rest of your time in law school. And thank you for watching now 2 videos. And this is Seiji, and she says bye too.